The thermometer outside Sarah Miller's mountain home hadn't risen above 0 degrees Fahrenheit in 3 weeks. The winter of 2024 was breaking all records in Montana's remote wilderness, turning the landscape into an unforgiving, frozen realm that tested the limits of every living creature. From her wooden cabin nestled among towering pines, Sarah watched as even the hardiest wildlife struggled to survive the brutal cold snap. At 43, Sarah had chosen this solitary life in the mountains after inheriting her grandfather's property 5 years ago. The simple log cabin, situated 20 miles from the nearest town of Pine Creek, offered her the peace she had always craved. Her work as a remote software developer allowed her the freedom to live where others might hesitate, surrounded by nothing but wilderness and the creatures that called these mountains home. This morning, like every other during this harsh winter, Sarah wrapped herself in her grandfather's old wool sweater and began her daily routine. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen while she added extra logs to the crackling fireplace, her sole source of heat since the power lines had taken a beating from the recent ice storms. Through her frost-covered windows, she could see the regular visitors to her property, 3 deer pawing through the snow to reach the feed she had scattered the previous evening, and a family of blue jays huddled near the heated bird bath she maintained. Sarah had always felt a deep connection to the wildlife around her home. Unlike many of her neighbors who viewed the animals as nuisances or threats, she saw them as fellow inhabitants of this harsh but beautiful land. She kept detailed journals of their patterns and behaviors, noting how they adapted to the extreme conditions. This winter, however, was different. Even the most resilient animals were showing signs of desperation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground as Sarah logged her final work hours for the day. The temperature had dropped even further, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie symphony of creaking branches and whistling gusts. It was then that she noticed something unusual. The deer, normally calm and focused on foraging, suddenly lifted their heads in unison, their ears twitching nervously. Sarah moved closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she tried to identify what had spooked them. The birds had gone silent, an unusual occurrence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. In her years of living here, she had learned to read these signs. When the forest fell quiet, it usually meant something significant was happening. As darkness began to creep across the landscape, Sarah heard it. A sound unlike anything she had encountered before echoed through the valley. It wasn't the familiar call of an owl or the howl of a wolf. This sound was different, almost like a deep pain moan that seemed to carry with it a note of desperation. The noise came again, closer this time. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized whatever was making that sound was heading toward her cabin. She quickly checked the locks on her doors, a habit ingrained from years of living alone in the wilderness. The emergency radio on her kitchen counter crackled with static, reminding her that communication with the outside world was limited in these conditions. Moving from window to window, Sarah scanned the tree line with growing apprehension. The snow had begun to fall again, heavy flakes swirling in the beam of her porch light, reducing visibility to mere feet. The moaning sound came once more, even closer, accompanied by what sounded like heavy footfalls in the deep snow. Sarah reached for her grandfather's old binoculars, hoping to pierce the growing darkness and swirling snow. As she adjusted the focus, movement caught her eye at the edge of the illuminated area. Something large was emerging from the shadows, something that made her breath catch in her throat. A massive shape moved slowly through the curtain of falling snow, its outline becoming clearer with each labored step. Sarah's fingers tightened around the binoculars as realization dawned on her. What she was seeing seemed impossible, yet there it was, dragging itself through the deepening snow toward her cabin. A full-grown grizzly bear, its fur covered in ice, moving with obvious distress in the bitter cold of a winter night when it should have been deep in hibernation. Little did Sarah know, but this moment would mark the beginning of an extraordinary encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about these powerful creatures and test the limits of her own compassion in ways she never imagined possible. Sarah pressed herself against the cold window, her heart thundering in her chest as she watched the massive grizzly bear lumber closer to her cabin. Years of wilderness experience had taught her that bears should be deep in hibernation during these frigid winter months. Yet here was one, moving through the knee-deep snow with visible difficulty, its powerful body seeming unusually weak and unsteady. The bear's fur, which should have been thick and fluffy, appeared matted with ice crystals that caught the dim light from her porch. Each exhale from its snout created a cloud of steam in the freezing air. Sarah could see now that it was leaving a trail of blood in the pristine snow, small crimson droplets marking its path toward her cabin. As the creature drew nearer, Sarah could better assess its condition. Its movements were sluggish, nothing like the powerful grace these predators usually displayed. Ice clung to its belly fur, where it had been dragging through deep snow, and its eyes, usually fierce and alert, seemed glazed with pain. The bear's right front paw was raised slightly off the ground, explaining the uneven gait she had noticed. Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about bear behavior. This was completely unprecedented. Bears were known to occasionally wake briefly during winter if their den was disturbed, but they never sought out human contact, yet this one was methodically making its way straight to her front porch, as if drawn by some desperate instinct. When the bear reached the bottom of her porch steps, it did something that made Sarah question her own sanity. Instead of showing aggression or trying to break in, behaviors she would have expected from a desperate wild animal, it slowly sat down in the snow. The motion seemed almost deliberate, like a dog sitting at its owner's door. Then came a sound that would haunt Sarah for years to come, a deep, rumbling whine that carried such profound suffering, it made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. The bear lifted its injured paw slightly, and in the porch light, Sarah could see the problem. The entire paw was encased in ice, swollen to nearly twice its normal size. Frostbite. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This powerful creature was literally freezing to death, and somehow, against all natural instincts, it had sought out human help. Sarah's fear began to war with her compassion. Every survival manual, every wildlife expert, and every park ranger would tell her to stay inside, to call for help, to wait for professionals. But as she reached for her phone, she remembered the ice storms had knocked out cell service days ago. The emergency radio crackled uselessly with static, and the nearest wildlife service was hours away, if they could even make it through the treacherous mountain roads. The bear made that sound again, a mixture of a whine and a moan that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the cabin. It lowered its head, still maintaining its sitting position, and Sarah witnessed something remarkable. The bear's body language completely contradicted everything she knew about these powerful predators. There was no aggression, no agitation, just what appeared to be pure exhaustion and suffering. Snow continued to fall, adding to the already thick layer of ice in the bear's fur. Sarah watched in amazement as it lifted its uninjured paw and placed it gently against her bottom porch step. Not clawing or scratching, just resting it there as if making a conscious effort to appear non-threatening. Its eyes, though clouded with pain, remained fixed on her window, carrying an almost human-like intelligence that made Sarah's breath catch. Time seemed to stand still as Sarah struggled with the most difficult decision of her life. Everything she knew about wildlife safety screamed at her to stay inside. Yet everything she understood about compassion and survival in these harsh mountains pulled her in the opposite direction. The bear's labored breathing was visible in the freezing air, each exhale weaker than the last. Sarah realized with growing certainty that if she did nothing, this magnificent creature would die on her porch tonight. The temperature was still dropping, and in its current condition, the bear had no chance of surviving until help could arrive. Its desperate gamble in seeking human aid would end in tragedy, unless she did something that every rational part of her mind was telling her was insane. As if sensing her internal struggle, the bear let out another soft whine, lower and weaker than before. Its head drooped slightly, the fight visibly draining from its massive body. In that moment, Sarah knew she couldn't just watch this animal die. She would have to help somehow, even though she had no idea what that help might entail or how she could possibly provide it safely. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for her grandfather's old winter coat, her mind already racing through possible plans. She was either about to make the biggest mistake of her life or participate in something truly extraordinary. Either way, she knew this night would change everything. The weight of Sarah's grandfather's coat felt reassuring on her shoulders as she stood in her kitchen, mind racing through possible scenarios. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered supplies, thick blankets, her emergency medical kit, and the powerful flashlight she kept for power outages. The bear's labored breathing was audible even through the cabin walls, each exhale growing weaker in the bitter cold. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see the creature's condition deteriorating rapidly. Ice crystals had formed thick crusts around its eyes, and its massive body shivered uncontrollably. The injured paw, still raised off the ground, had taken on a bluish tinge that Sarah recognized as severe frostbite. Without immediate help, the damage would be permanent if the bear survived at all. Sarah's wilderness first aid training kicked in as she assessed the situation. Frostbite needed gradual warming to prevent further tissue damage. The bear had lost significant body heat, evident in its violent shivering. Its natural hibernation cycle had been disrupted, leaving it vulnerable to the extreme cold. These weren't just signs of distress, they were symptoms of impending death. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Grizzly bears were among the most dangerous predators in North America. Even injured, one swipe from those powerful claws could be fatal. Every wildlife safety guide warned against approaching injured animals, especially apex predators. They became unpredictable, dangerous, desperate. But as Sarah watched, the bear did something that defied everything she knew about wild animals. It lowered its massive head to rest on its uninjured paw, maintaining that strange, almost domestic posture. Its eyes, though glazed with pain, remained fixed on her windows, carrying an intelligence that seemed to transcend the natural barrier between humans and wildlife. The bear wasn't acting like a predator at all, but like a creature seeking sanctuary. Sarah's hands moved to her grandfather's journal, kept on the kitchen shelf. He had lived in these mountains for 40 years, documenting countless encounters with local wildlife. She had never found any mention of behavior like this, yet his last entry, written just before his passing, stuck in her mind. Nature's greatest mysteries often come disguised as moments of choice. Trust your instincts, but more importantly, trust your heart. The bear's whimper cut through her thoughts, weaker now, barely audible above the howling wind. Sarah noticed its breathing had become shallow, its massive chest barely rising with each intake of freezing air. The snow around it had stopped melting, indicating its body temperature was dropping dangerously low. Without intervention, the bear would not survive the night. Sarah closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her decision. If she was going to help, she needed to act now, before the cold claimed another victim in this merciless winter. She quickly formulated a plan, knowing she would only get one chance to do this right. The garage attached to her cabin could serve as a sheltered space, warm enough to prevent further freezing, but secure enough to provide some protection if the bear's demeanor changed. Moving with purposeful calm, Sarah gathered additional supplies: honey from her pantry, leftover stew from dinner, and several gallons of warm water. Her hands were steady now, fear replaced by focused determination. She thought of all the times she had watched this mountain's creatures care for each other, how even different species would sometimes band together to survive the harsh winters. Perhaps this was nature's way of teaching her another lesson about survival and compassion. Sarah put on her warmest boots and grabbed her grandfather's old walking stick, more for reassurance than protection. She knew that if the bear decided to attack, nothing she carried would make a difference. This would have to be about trust on both sides. As she reached for the door handle, she whispered a quiet prayer to whatever forces had guided this creature to her doorstep. The thermometer by the door read 30 degrees below zero as Sarah turned the handle. The bear's eyes tracked her movement, but it didn't lift its head or show any sign of aggression. Its breathing had become so shallow that each exhale barely created a visible mist in the frigid air. Time was running out. With slow, deliberate movements, Sarah opened her door and stepped out onto her porch, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. In this moment, she wasn't just deciding to help an injured animal, she was choosing to trust in something she didn't fully understand, something that defied explanation but demanded action. The porch boards creaked beneath Sarah's feet as she took her first careful step toward the bear. The falling snow had slowed to gentle flurries, creating an almost ethereal silence, broken only by the bear's labored breathing. Sarah kept her movements slow and gentle, speaking in a soft, continuous murmur to make her presence known. "Easy there, big one. I'm going to help you, but we need to trust each other." Her voice, though trembling slightly, remained steady and calm. The bear's eyes followed her movements, but its body remained still, maintaining that unusual sitting position despite her approach. Each breath it took created a smaller cloud of steam in the freezing air, a visible sign of its fading strength. Sarah stopped about 10 feet away, giving the bear space while she assessed its condition more closely. The frost-bitten paw was worse than she had initially thought. Ice had formed between the pads and around the claws, creating a crystalline boot that must have been agonizing. The bear's fur, usually thick and protective, was matted with ice all along its belly and legs, pulling out in frozen clumps that left its skin exposed to the bitter cold. Moving with deliberate slowness, Sarah set down the warm bowl of stew she had brought out. The rich aroma drifted through the cold air, and the bear's nostrils flared slightly, showing the first real sign of interest since she had emerged. She slid the bowl closer with her grandfather's walking stick, maintaining a safe distance. The bear looked at the bowl, then back at Sarah, making no move toward the food. Instead, it lifted its injured paw slightly, as if emphasizing its more urgent need. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly communicative, that Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Your paw first, then food," Sarah said softly, reaching for the warm water she had brought. "We need to warm you up gradually." She poured some water into a shallow basin, testing the temperature with her fingers to ensure it wasn't too warm. Sudden heat could cause more damage to frostbitten tissue. The next few moments would determine everything. Sarah needed to get closer, to actually touch the bear, something that went against every survival instinct she possessed. She kept talking, her quiet voice a constant presence in the still night air, as she inched forward with the basin. When she was within arm's reach, the bear did something remarkable. It slowly, carefully extended its injured paw toward her, the movement so gentle it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The trust being displayed was beyond anything she had ever experienced with a wild animal. With trembling hands, Sarah placed the basin beneath the bear's paw. "This might hurt at first," she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. She began to pour the warm water over the frozen paw, watching as the ice slowly began to melt. The bear flinched slightly but kept its paw in place, its dark eyes fixed on Sarah's face. As the ice melted, Sarah could see the true extent of the damage. The paw was severely swollen, with patches of discolored skin visible beneath the fur. But thankfully, when she gently felt for a pulse in the pad, she found one. The tissue was cold but not dead. With proper care, the bear might keep the paw. The garage door opened with a groan as Sarah used her automatic opener. The bear watched the door rise with obvious interest, its head tilting slightly at the mechanical sound. Sarah had already prepared the space, laying down thick blankets and ensuring all dangerous tools were secured away. "Come on," she encouraged, standing slowly and gesturing toward the garage. "It's warm in there." She took a few steps toward the door, then waited, holding her breath. The bear looked at the open door, then at Sarah, then back at the door. With painful slowness, it pushed itself to its feet, swaying slightly from exhaustion. Sarah's heart pounded as the massive creature began to move. Even injured and weakened, its sheer size was intimidating, but its movements remained slow and deliberate as it limped toward the garage, leaving a trail of melting ice in its wake. The bear paused at the threshold, sniffing the air cautiously. Inside, the temperature was significantly warmer, heated by Sarah's emergency propane heater. The bear seemed to sense the warmth, taking another step forward. Sarah watched in amazement as this magnificent creature, this apex predator, willingly entered the shelter she offered, trusting her in a way that defied explanation. The bear settled onto the blankets with a deep sigh that seemed to carry months of exhaustion. Sarah slowly closed the garage door halfway, leaving enough space for fresh air while containing the warmth. As she set down the bowl of stew within easy reach, she realized that the hardest part was over. Now began the real work of healing. The first week was the most critical in the bear's recovery. Sarah converted her garage into a makeshift wildlife hospital, maintaining a constant warm temperature with space heaters while ensuring proper ventilation. She kept detailed notes of every change in the bear's condition, tracking its gradual improvement with the dedication of a trained medical professional. The bear's frostbitten paw required the most attention. Sarah spent hours each day carefully warming the damaged tissue with lukewarm water, applying healing salves, and wrapping the paw in soft bandages. What amazed her most was the bear's patience during these treatments. It would extend its massive paw toward her without prompting, holding perfectly still as she worked, watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word she spoke. On the third day, Sarah finally managed to reach Dr. James Wilson, the regional wildlife veterinarian, on her emergency radio. His initial response to her situation was disbelief, followed by serious concern for her safety. However, when she described the bear's unusual behavior and its willing cooperation with treatment, his scientific curiosity got the better of him. "I am going to document everything, Doctor," Wilson said during his first visit, his voice filled with wonder as he watched Sarah change the bear's bandages. The massive creature remained calm throughout his examination, showing none of the aggression he had expected. "In 30 years of treating wildlife, I have never seen anything like this. This bear is exhibiting behavior that completely contradicts everything we know about grizzlies." Sarah discovered that the bear was female, approximately 6 years old, and had likely been disturbed from hibernation when melting snow flooded her den. Dr. Wilson estimated she had wandered for days in the bitter cold before finding Sarah's cabin, which explained the severity of her condition. The fact that she had sought human help was unprecedented. As weeks passed, a remarkable bond began to form between Sarah and the bear. She named her Luna after the full moon that had illuminated the night of their first encounter. Luna showed an almost dog-like appreciation for Sarah's presence, greeting her with soft wafts of breath each morning when she entered the garage. She would wait patiently for her meals, take medicine hidden in honey without protest, and even allow Sarah to check her healing paw without the slightest sign of aggression. "The implications of this behavior are staggering," Dr. Wilson commented during one of his weekly visits. "It challenges everything we thought we knew about bear intelligence and their capacity for trust. Luna isn't just tolerating human presence. She's actively seeking connection. She recognizes you as her healer." The healing process was not without its challenges. There were nights when Luna's pain seemed overwhelming, and her whimpers of discomfort tore at Sarah's heart. During these moments, Sarah would sit near her, speaking softly and reading aloud from her grandfather's journal, until the bear's breathing steadied and she drifted into sleep. By the end of the first month, Luna's paw had healed enough for her to put weight on it. Sarah began encouraging short walks around the garage, supporting the bear's massive weight with her body when needed. The sight of this petite woman walking beside a full-grown grizzly bear, helping it regain its strength, became a source of amazement for Dr. Wilson and the few wildlife experts he had cautiously invited to observe. "We are witnessing something extraordinary," one researcher noted, watching Luna gently take treats from Sarah's hand. "This could revolutionize our understanding of wildlife rehabilitation and human-animal bonds. The trust displayed here goes beyond mere conditioning or survival instinct." As spring approached, Luna's strength returned steadily. Her fur regrew where the frostbite had damaged it, and her movements became more fluid and natural. But the most remarkable transformation was in her eyes. The pain and desperation that had marked their first encounter had been replaced by a calm intelligence, and what Sarah could only describe as affection. Dr. Wilson helped Sarah document every aspect of Luna's recovery, creating detailed records that would later become part of a groundbreaking study on wildlife rehabilitation. The garage door remained open more often now, allowing Luna to feel the warming spring air, but surprisingly, she showed no immediate desire to leave her sanctuary. "She knows she's not fully healed," Sarah explained to Dr. Wilson one evening, as they watched Luna carefully testing her weight on her healing paw. "She'll leave when she's ready." The bond between woman and bear had deepened into something that defied scientific explanation, a connection built on mutual trust and respect. Luna's recovery became a journey of healing for Sarah as well. The solitude she had sought in these mountains had been transformed into something richer, a deeper connection with the natural world that surrounded her. Each day brought new discoveries about bear behavior, intelligence, and the capacity for trust between species. As winter's grip finally began to loosen, Luna's movements became stronger, more confident. She would stand at the garage entrance, watching the forest come alive with spring, but always returning to the safety of Sarah's presence. Dr. Wilson continued to marvel at their interaction, documenting what would become one of the most remarkable cases of wildlife rehabilitation ever recorded. The day Luna finally walked into the forest was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Sarah stood at the garage entrance watching the bear's now healthy form disappear among the pine trees. Her heart felt heavy, yet she knew this was exactly what they had worked toward for months. Luna paused at the forest's edge, turned to look back at Sarah one final time, and disappeared into her natural habitat. But this wasn't the end of their story. 3 days later, as Sarah sat on her porch with her morning coffee, a familiar shape emerged from the tree line. Luna had returned, carrying something in her mouth. It was a honeycomb, dripping with wild honey, which she carefully placed at the bottom of Sarah's porch steps before sitting in her now familiar pose. Sarah laughed through her tears, realizing that their bond had evolved into something entirely unexpected, a friendship between two different species. As spring blossomed into summer, Luna's visits became a regular occurrence. She would appear every few days, sometimes staying for hours in Sarah's yard, other times just stopping briefly as if checking in. Dr. Wilson continued to document these visits, amazed by the bear's ability to balance her wild nature with her connection to Sarah. Luna showed no interest in other human properties, maintained her natural foraging habits, and displayed all the normal behaviors of a wild grizzly, except for her special relationship with Sarah. The story of Sarah and Luna spread through the local community, gradually changing people's perspectives on wildlife. Local schools began requesting Sarah to share her experience, teaching children about respect for wildlife and the importance of conservation. She showed them photos and videos of Luna's recovery, helping them understand that even the most intimidating creatures deserved compassion and respect. "It's not about taming wild animals," Sarah would explain to her captivated audiences. "It's about understanding that we share this world with them, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness just how remarkable they truly are." Her grandfather's journal, filled with his wildlife observations, became a teaching tool, showing how generations of respectful coexistence with nature could yield extraordinary results. Sarah's experience with Luna led her to establish the Mountain Wildlife Protection Initiative, a program dedicated to helping injured wildlife and educating the community about peaceful coexistence with nature. Dr. Wilson helped her set up proper facilities and protocols, ensuring that while Luna's case was unique, other animals could receive help safely and professionally. The local rangers, initially skeptical of Sarah's story, became strong supporters of her work. They consulted her on wildlife incidents, valuing her unique perspective on animal behavior. Her approach to wildlife management, influenced by her experience with Luna, emphasized understanding and compassion over fear and control. Through summer and fall, Luna continued her visits, sometimes bringing her own discoveries to share. Interesting stones, pine cones, or branches with particularly sweet berries. Each visit reinforced the extraordinary nature of their connection. She remained wild, but their trust had created a bridge between their two worlds. As winter approached again, Sarah noticed Luna's visits becoming less frequent, nature's rhythm calling the bear to prepare for hibernation. But before she disappeared for her winter sleep, Luna made one final visit. She sat in her usual spot, watching Sarah with those intelligent eyes that had once begged for help on a freezing night. Sarah sat on her porch steps, maintaining the respectful distance that had always characterized their relationship. "Stay safe this winter," she said softly, her voice carrying in the crisp autumn air. Luna's response was a gentle woof of breath, a sound that Sarah had come to recognize as acknowledgement. The impact of their story extended far beyond their mountain community. Research papers were published about their unique bond, challenging conventional wisdom about wildlife rehabilitation and human-animal relationships. Sarah's Mountain Wildlife Protection Initiative became a model for other communities living in close proximity to wildlife, promoting understanding over fear. As Luna disappeared into the forest for her winter hibernation, Sarah reflected on how one desperate night had changed everything. Her grandfather's last journal entry now made perfect sense. Nature's greatest mysteries indeed came disguised as moments of choice. Her choice to help a suffering creature, despite every logical reason not to, had not only saved Luna's life, but had opened a door to understanding wildlife in a profound new way. Sarah knew that even if Luna never returned, their story would continue to influence how people viewed their relationship with wildlife. One act of compassion had created ripples that would affect generations to come, teaching an invaluable lesson about trust, respect, and the extraordinary connections possible between all living beings. The frozen bear who had begged to enter her house that winter night had not only survived, but had helped Sarah discover her true purpose. Together, they had shown the world that sometimes the most incredible stories begin with a moment of trust between the most unlikely of friends. If you enjoyed this remarkable tale of friendship between Sarah and Luna, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary wildlife stories. Click the notification bell to stay updated with heartwarming animal encounters that challenge our understanding of the natural world. Share this story with others who believe in the power of compassion and the amazing connections possible between humans and wildlife.